Hey, what's happening? Sibiwe again, and we're continuing with our online series titled Autopsy, where we're investigating sins that we easily see in other people and easily avoid or ignore in our own lives. Now, today is an interesting one, and you might think that today's one is probably not relevant for you or even relevant for our culture, because we live in a very work-driven culture where everybody is doing the next best thing to be better for themselves or better than the next person. How is it possible that the concept of laziness and sloth might even be relevant for our workaholic kind of world? Well, I hope that by the end of this discussion, this deadly sin called sloth, or being sluggard or lazy, that it might give you some insight into your own life. Maybe it is something that you are dealing with. You see, in a world where we are constantly doing more things, we are constantly also distracted by more things. And being lazy is not just lounging around at home. Being lazy can also be a people who live constantly distracted from doing the necessary things, but instead we do the things that cause less effort for us, right? They don't really invoke difficulty in our lives, and we use the glittery things around us to avoid doing the necessary things in our lives. So, what is sloth? Well, a definition for sloth is this: the avoidance of effort or responsibility. The Latin translates sloth as living without care. It's having a life that is without care for the love of God or the love of neighbor. Its primary focus is self. Self is king. Self is the most important thing that must be protected, and that self must be comfortable. In given the choice between comfort and difficulty, sloth will always choose comfort, never difficulty. So I want to look at three possible doors that you and I might be walking in that can point us in the direction that maybe laziness is something that we are wrestling with. Here's the first one. You might be struggling with this deadly sin if you're constantly making excuses. Proverbs 26 verse 13 says, the sluggard or the lazy person says, there is a lion out on the road. There is a lion out on the streets. I can't go out there. Right? I can't go and do that thing. I can't go and engage that thing. Why? Because, I might end up being in danger. There's constantly excuses that we are making in order to avoid doing the necessary things in our life. See, I think the biggest time waster in our life is actually not the moments when we are sitting around doing nothing or even procrastination. I think the biggest time waster in your and I's life is the days when we make excuses. See, making an excuse is far worse than just procrastinating or doing nothing. Making an excuse is constantly opting out, right? It's constantly choosing to not show up for your life, show up in your life for the things that God has placed in your life to grow you and strengthen you. It's when we live with this deep understanding that if I don't feel like doing it, then maybe it's wrong, right? That I need to feel like doing it in order to do it. And if that's the case, man, there's so many things in this life that I shouldn't do because I don't feel like doing a number of things that I do. And if that's the case, and you keep making excuses because you don't feel like doing stuff, you might be struggling with sloth. The second door is this. Are you constantly busy but never fruitful? Proverbs 26 verse 14 says, as a door turns on its hinges, so does a sluggard on his or her bed. These are people who are constantly busy. They are busybodies, always distracted by the next beautiful, shiny, glittering thing. They only want to do the things that they're excited about. They are constantly turning, but never fruitful. Constantly in motion, but never producing adequate results based on all the things that they do. They only do the things that they like to do. Those are people that are not great to hire, by the way. They'll always be excited about their own things, never excited about other things that other people have involved them in, right? They are constantly moving, always waiting for the next high, and never get down to the discipline of doing the necessary things so that they themselves might grow. They have this deep belief in their hearts that if it's boring, it's wrong, that it needs to be exciting for them to do it. This leads to the third possible door, and that is you might find that you are wrestling with laziness and sloth if you're constantly starting things without finishing them. Proverbs 26 continues to say in verse 15 that the sluggard buries his hand in the dish. It wears him out to bring it back to his mouth, right? It's always starting something. There's this new thing that they're starting there and here and everywhere. But the ability to take their hand out, it tires them. They don't know how to finish what they are starting. All around them, they've got things that they've started, and everyone thinks they're great. They think that they're great, but they just don't know how to finish it. This comes from that belief that if it's difficult, it's wrong. It must be easy for it to be the right thing. And if it's too difficult, maybe it's not from God. Maybe it's not for me. I love what Thomas Edison once said. He said, we often miss opportunities because they are dressed in overalls and they look like work. You see, when that happens, when we see something and we go, man, that is difficult, we opt for something that's more comfortable for us, because clearly if it's too difficult, it mustn't be for me, it must be for somebody else, because what I'm purposed to do surely will come naturally for me. Laziness is dangerous. It's dangerous not because it wastes our life, but laziness is dangerous because it ruins our life, right? It eats away at us. We avoid the necessary things of our life that can really bring the kind of growth that allows us to make an impact, make a difference in the world. But laziness just eats away at our time and our ambitions. Sam Chan says something quite powerful regarding leadership. He says, if you want to grow, you have to endure change. And if you are going to endure change, you have to be able to persevere through pain. The reason why we oftentimes don't want to grow is that it comes at a cost. It's painful to grow because it requires us to change and it requires us to endure much pain. Imagine for a moment if Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane decided to let his will be done and not God's will, right? Remember, he's sitting in the Garden of Gethsemane and he says, Lord, man, if you could take this cup from me, God, that would be great, but not my will, but your will be done. See, he chose the difficult thing because it was the necessary thing. He chose the path of great resistance because it wasn't. He wasn't deliberately trying to bring harm to himself, but he had a greater mission at hand that required a degree of difficulty. And because of the greater mission, he endured the difficulty. Maybe some of us have a small vision for our lives, and we need an upgrade of vision so that we wouldn't be afraid of the difficulty. So here's a question I want to ask you before we end this. What things in your life, what necessary things in your life do you keep wishing away, right? When difficulty comes, when tough things come in your life, when things that are boring or less exciting and things that you don't feel like doing? What things do you keep wishing away and hoping, man, I wish that I had that car instead of this. I wish I had that job instead of this. I wish I had that marriage instead of this. And you keep wishing them away instead of working in them. You see, if you want to engage and combat the deadly sin of laziness and sloth, you need to discipline yourself despite difficulty. You need to learn how to discipline yourself despite of difficulty. Now, let me close with this last thought. Let's think about this week, that sloth is the rejection of grace. Being lazy is the rejection of grace. You see, if we only have a view that grace is God being merciful on us, and we don't have an understanding that grace is also the empowerment that God gives us in order to do what we couldn't do for ourselves, or the empowerment that God gives for us to do that which He's called us to do. If that is what grace is, then laziness and sloth is to reject the grace of God over our lives. And instead, we choose the comfort of man over the grace of God. I hope this week you would be diligent despite difficulty to receive the grace of God so that you can do the difficult, the boring, and even the things you don't feel like doing.